Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Ich bin Gordon Repinski, Chefredakteur von Politico Deutschland. Und mit meinem heutigen Gast will ich tief in die US-Politik eintauchen. Rahm Emanuel war Bürgermeister von Chicago und Stabschef von Barack Obama im Weißen Haus. Und er wird als nächster möglicher Präsidentschaftskandidat der Demokraten 2028 gehandelt. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Berlin.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, I've just returned from Ankara and the NATO summit, where President Trump first sharply criticized America's allies before later saying that, quote, love was in the air. Can you help our audience understand where the United States stands on NATO?
Yeah, I can help you on the United States. I can't help you translate what Donald Trump says or thinks. I don't get paid that much to do that. Look, there was actually, right beforehand, a poll in the United States, and the American people, both parties, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, very supportive of NATO, very supportive of America's allies that make up NATO, and of the role of NATO in America's security and also European security. So if there's an attempt for the audience, rest assured you have bipartisan support both in the House and the Senate, but most importantly, support in the American people for NATO. There would be a massive political backlash if the president was to do anything to the alliance. What he said, and from love to whatever, I don't think he knows what he's saying when he says what he says on any given moment specifically. But the American people, 100% supportive of NATO.
And would that be one of your approaches to rebuild America's ties with Europe?
I mean, one of the reasons for the trip here, I just left Israel, laid a specific policy as it relates to Middle East peace and obviously opportunities for Israel and the Palestinians going forward. But coming here to redefine what I think the relationship is. In short kind of sentence, going from common defense to collective deterrence. Not putting aside the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but this has been a massive problem for Putin. The economy is on its back heels. NATO expanded to Sweden and Finland on the border to Russia. They've lost their footing in Europe. They've lost Armenia in what is called their near abroad. Their intelligence agency has missed 3 big operations, and what was supposed to be a weekend endeavor going to Kyiv has turned into a 5-year war. This is a wounded Russia, not just Putin, a wounded, humiliated Russia. So you have to look around the corner. The idea of a collective deterrence, one, everything west of the Rhine River that's not essential, equipment and people, move it east into Poland, Romania, Latvia, Estonia, and the other parts of Moldova, the other parts of the countries that all make up, now Moldova's NATO, but you make up all parts, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. 2, NATO has never articulated these what are called gray zone attacks and what are the red lines. Here in Germany, you know, there was almost a bomb on a DHL. You have cables being cut undersea. You have the Prime Minister's private homes from the UK being firebombed. Articulate what the cost will be to Russia directly when they cross certain lines. That's never been done. Number 3, Europe should be providing or pushing its resources to common defense. America's resources should go to backing up that common defense, what I call the tripwire and support. Meaning there's certain things we have on satellites, certain things we have on cybersecurity that would be too cost prohibitive for Europe, NATO members to pay for on their own. We should be supplying that so that your defense resources not only go to your common defense, but actually don't have to replicate what we can provide. 4th and finally, on the economic statecraft. Europe and the United States is way too tied to Russia and China, North Korea and Iran on certain supplies, and also supply routes. Start building resilience in the system. 2nd, in the areas of robotics, AI, quantum computing, fusion technology, and other areas, joint research that actually builds up the technological capacity of both the United States and Europe, so we're ahead of where China is. If you do those 4 things, I believe that we will collectively orient NATO closer to deterrence rather than defense. Defense is really, when you take a first punch, how do you protect yourself? Deterrence is preventing the first punch, so that the other side thinks first.
Now, that first punch has happened in Ukraine, so deterrence on that level is not possible anymore. Now you have to fix that issue. And do you see this as a common effort of the US with NATO allies?
We're a part of NATO. 100% is a NATO initiative. That's why the psychology, the mentality, the North Star where you're pointing isn't common defense, meaning how do you come together under Article 5 when you get hit? Collective deterrence is about making sure the other side knows that if you do this, there's a price, and we have that. Second is in the capacity. So Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think correctly, should be seen from 2014 into Crimea. Absolutely. This wasn't a recent phenomenon in 2022, in February 2022. This is a phenomenon that goes back a decade, and at no point did Ukraine have the deterrence. They clearly didn't have the capacity to prevent it. And then the ongoing green men that Putin called that were involved in the 4 regions of Ukraine, at no point was not only the security really enforced, but the deterrence. This is also to say Russia is not stopping here. And especially a wounded, humiliated Russia is not stopping here. And we can't keep doing the same things we've been doing for 40 years as if that is going to be the deterrent level. Presence on the old Warsaw Pact countries has its own deterrence. Us, now it's not just the United States. I would challenge Germany, France, UK, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians. You too have to move resources out of your countries into the front line so that Russia, not just Putin, understands this is a very NATO-wide deterrence and understand what those are. But there's other components to it that I just outlined.
Everything you say will sound very promising to European leaders. But coming back to the NATO summit in Ankara, there I could listen to leaders almost praising President Trump for pushing them into spending more on defense. Would you say he still has a point in demanding more defense spending in Europe?
Of course he does. And Europe knows that. I mean, my attitude about this is one or two things. One is it wasn't Russia that caused that. It was fear of America that caused the 5%, not that we bludgeoned or whatever. Second, as it relates to kind of going forward and how to think of these resources, where do you spend them? So you have to have a theory of the case, and then that will direct the funding. It's just not a number. Are you doing tanks or drones or both? And I think one of the lessons out of both Russia-Ukraine theater and out of both the Iran and the Strait of Hormuz theater, we have an operative theory in the United States to be able to fight 2 wars simultaneously. My point has been that you have to be able to fight 2 different type of wars simultaneously, both a conventional and unconventional. Now, what do I mean by unconventional? Ukraine doesn't have a navy, but they control the Black Sea. Iran doesn't have a navy, and nothing's moving through the Strait of Hormuz. We collectively in NATO need to be able to fight a unconventional war or non-conventional, and Ukraine has shown that, and a conventional simultaneously in one theater of war. We're not built for that, neither the United States or you. Now, the other piece is, let's be also honest to the core part of your question. Yes, you should do the 5%. You're responsible for getting dependent on America over the years. The truth is, we're responsible for letting you get dependent on us. So now we can sit here and point fingers in the back or look forward into the future and say, what do we have to do? And to me, both of us are responsible for a past that has its own mistakes. Learn from them, apply them going forward. I'm not interested in looking backwards. I'm interested in looking to the future and getting ready for it so we don't have any kind of war on the European continent.
Let's also look into the future, the near future, when it comes to Iran. You just mentioned it. Do you believe that the United States should consider further military action, or what is the best way forward in the current situation?
I said this before. There was a memo of understanding between the United States and Iran. I refer to it as the memo of misunderstanding. And what's happened is very clear. Iran thinks they're interpreting a paragraph, it's called paragraph 5, ironically, about who's going to manage the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States has one other interpretation. So I call it the memo of misunderstanding. The second thing is the President, Trump, likes to say that he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And if you know anything about the Middle East, where I've spent some of my childhood, the Iranians are teaching the president the art of the negotiation. And he is acting out, etc., because they're teaching him and schooling him on the art of the negotiation.
But what's
And
the
he is-
best way forward now?
Well, there's a three-part. One is you can't allow the Strait of Hormuz to be an Iranian waterway. Not only will that have massive implications economically just in the Gulf countries that are our allies, but that will then impact other places going forward. Second, both in the immediate term, if you really wanted to get out of this, just as an idea, and I've said this before, you can ask the International Maritime Association associated with the United Nations to manage the Strait of Hormuz, charge a fee that goes to all the parties that have been affected, meaning Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, and Qatar, just to name all the countries, not a fee that Iran charges for Iran. Absolutely not. That would have a short duration, 5-7 years, till you establish a different protocol. Third, I outlined this in Israel, but it is relevant here. In the 2023 G20, the United States announced the IMEC, the India, Mideast, Europe trade route, most important, from ports to cables to digital, energy pipelines. It would, A, become the most important economic trade route in the world. B, it would cut costs by 30%. C, it would add resilience to the system that you have today. And fourth, most importantly, it would allow us to build resilience around the Strait of Hormuz, because if Iran does this once, you could solve it today, but trust me, you're not solving it permanently. And remember, Saudi Arabia had pipelines that went to the Red Sea, indicating they could get 6 million barrels a day of oil, not because they were dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, because they had an alternative. The UAE did a similar effort, not as much. I think it was 30 to 40%. For Kuwait, for Iraq, for Bahrain, for UAE, for all the countries, you need a route under the Strait of Hormuz so Iran doesn't pull the shenanigans ever again.
When you discuss the Middle East, you will always have to discuss the situation in Israel, the situation with Hezbollah, and the threats and tensions that are happening there. You were in Tel Aviv earlier this week, speaking at Tel Aviv University, and you were criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu's government and were asking for a new approach. What's your expectation? What's the right approach?
First of all, one, they're going to have an election in short time in October.
So your approach is to wait for the result?
No. Do I look like a patient person to you? So number two, I laid out a specific peace proposal and that had a peace component as well as an economic component. Because I think one of the big threats for Israel, and I said this directly, is you today are no longer the startup nation that captured the imagination of the world. In your prime minister's own terms, he wants to become Sparta, not the startup nation. You have led yourself into a position that you've lost Europe public opinion, you lost America public opinion. Europe is your biggest economic market. America is your biggest political patron. And you only picked up Somaliland. This is not sustainable. In 22 years, you'll be 100 years old. You think this is going to be going on in 22 years from now? Not a chance. Now, to me, the big fault I have with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and side note, in 2009, when I'm a President Obama's chief of staff, because of the housing in the West Bank, and I disagreed with him forcefully in front of him, and I told him he was wrong, he publicly accused me of being a self-loathing Jew. So I didn't need a war to know that what he was going to do was going to be costly. That's what I was trying to warn against in 2009. Third, in the component here, we have a phrase in America, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. And the problem for the prime minister is the military capability of Israel is so strong that he's allowed economic statecraft, political power, cultural attraction to atrophy, and he's defined Israel's national security under one tool as if that's the toolbox. And two examples of this besides the Palestinian issue. You mentioned Lebanon. The Lebanese government is trying to work with Israel. It's the best government they've had in 30 years, 40 years. I met with people, and as a former mayor, I know about subnational efforts, what I call healthcare diplomacy. Israeli doctors, Jordanian doctors are with cooperation with the Lebanese government providing healthcare in southern Lebanon. That to me is the opportunity to actually bring peace so the families of Kiryat Shmona in the northern Israel and in the Galilee get peace. The Syrian government, which is a route from Iran to Hezbollah, You have a government for the first time in 50 years of Israel's existence who says, we have a common enemy in Iran. Let's have a security agreement. Pick up the phone and call. This is an opportunity. And, there's an old joke that Abba Eban, the late UN and foreign minister of Israel, used to say that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to make peace. That's becoming true label and definition of Benjamin Netanyahu. He never misses an opportunity to actually advance Israel's strategic interests.
Your position on the Middle East is a lot more nuanced than we sometimes hear it from other voices in your Democratic Party. Is this effort of integrating the positions something that is a preparation for 2028 for you?
Well, first of all, I worked on this as President Clinton's senior advisor. I worked on the Oslo Accords, the Y plantations, and Camp David. As President Obama's chief of staff, I also worked on this issue. You can go back and look at all the history. Hillary Clinton wrote about it. I was the strongest voice in opposing what was going on in the housing on the West Bank that would make a peace agreement impossible. So this is not news or new to me. I have been that. My effort is actually, I happen to think, the alliance is worth investing in and strengthening. As I said to the Israeli public, I don't want to say it from Washington and throw spitballs across the Atlantic. I went there and I said, look, this is either going to change or it's going to fall apart. And if you think the United States is a worthy ally and an alliance worth saving, here's what has to happen for it to change. Now, I will say, having worked on the first agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, back in Oslo, the Arab League sat on the sidelines and didn't do squat. Nothing. Today, in 2000 and 2013, they issued and said, if you come to an agreement, all of us will recognize the state of Israel, 21 nations. My view on that is that in that process is, okay, ready, let's go, game on, we'll take you. Then Israel breaks out of the pariah status and has 21 nations in the Mideast that they're a part of geographically, and they have peace.
Mr. Ambassador, we've been speaking almost as if you were already the Democratic nominee for the next presidential election. But one key question, I guess, remains. Will you run?
Look, I'm going to make that decision as I go around the country, the United States, hearing about what I think is the fundamental, not unaffordability, but the brokenness of owning a home, saving for your kids' education and retirement, and providing your health care for your family. Every one of those pillars are broken. I think I have an idea how to fix those. If I decide I want to do it, I'll go do it. If I think I have the answer to those questions. My big thing of raising these issues about NATO, about peace in the Middle East, if you do decide to do it, one of the things I know is in that job comes a thing called the Situation Room. You better know your way around. You better have a vision of what it takes. This is not an easy world. You have China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea trying to bury you. We have a president today, in my view, who thinks those are his friends. They're not America's friends. They're not Europe's friends. We have a common enemy. Number two, I say this as somebody who spent his whole life in public life. I'm interested in making sure we have a country today, which is really the burning issue for me. 50% of American kids cannot read at grade level. And nobody from the President of the United States on down seems to get upset about it. To me, that is unacceptable to allow a child to fail at the most fundamental thing that's going to determine their success.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
I think I stressed your patience level.
I think I will translate what you said for the German audience. It's very possible that I spoke to the potential candidate of the Democratic Party and hope to see you again in Berlin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it.